Luca, I'll be there in 15 minutes. Just wait for me. Steve's text had arrived exactly 20 minutes ago, and here I was, still standing outside his apartment building like some pathetic puppy waiting for its owner. The morning sun beat down mercilessly, and a bead of sweat trickled down my temple. My throat felt parched, and the idea of getting coffee suddenly seemed less like a want and more like a necessity. I glanced across the street and spotted a charming little café I'd never really paid attention to before. The building had large windows framed by ivy, and the hand-painted sign above the door read Rosewood Café in elegant script. Perfect. I could grab something to drink while I waited for Steve to finally show up. Crossing the street, I pulled open the heavy wooden door and immediately got hit with the rich aroma of freshly ground coffee beans. The place was busier than I'd expected for a Sunday morning. Nearly every table occupied with couples sharing pastries and friends laughing over steaming mugs. I made my way toward the counter, but the line stretched back almost to the door. A young woman with a messy bun was frantically trying to keep up with orders while her coworker fought with what appeared to be a malfunctioning espresso machine. "Excuse me," I said to the cashier when I finally reached the front. "Is there any chance I could just grab a seat by the window? I'm meeting someone." She gave me an apologetic smile. "I'm so sorry, all our window seats are reserved right now. But if you'd like, you could find a spot inside and I'll bring your order over." I nodded, stepping aside to let the next customer order. My eyes scanned the cafe's interior, searching for an empty chair, maybe a corner where I could wait without being in anyone's way. That's when everything stopped. Steve. My Steve. Sitting in a corner booth. But he wasn't alone. A blond guy sat across from him, leaning forward with his elbows on the table, laughing at something Steve had just said. And Steve was holding his hand. Right there, on top of the table, fingers intertwined like it was the most natural thing in the world. That smile Steve wore, the one I thought he reserved only for me, was being given freely to this stranger. My heart didn't just sink, it plummeted. The air seemed to vanish from my lungs, and my phone nearly slipped from my suddenly numb fingers. I stood there frozen, unable to move forward or backward, unable to process what I was seeing. "Excuse me, are you all right?" The voice came from behind me, and I felt a gentle touch on my shoulder. I spun around, startled, and found myself looking up at a man who seemed to have stepped out of a business magazine cover. He was tall, considerably taller than me, with sharp, defined features and dark eyes that held an unexpected warmth despite their intensity. His charcoal suit fit him perfectly, tailored in a way that spoke of both wealth and impeccable taste. Yes, I'm... The words died in my throat. His gaze followed the direction I'd been staring, and when his eyes landed on Steve and his companion, something shifted in his expression. First confusion, then recognition, and finally his jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Ah," he said slowly, understanding dawning in his voice. "You must be Steve's latest victim, I presume?" Heat flooded my face, a mixture of embarrassment and anger. "Excuse me, who are you?" "Ashton," he interrupted, his voice remaining calm but firm. "Ashton Wilder. And that person you're staring at happens to be my younger half-brother." I blinked rapidly, trying to process this information. Half-brother? In all the 8 months Steve and I had been together, he'd never once mentioned having a sibling. Especially not one who looked like he belonged on the cover of Fortune magazine. Ashton studied me for a moment, and then something resembling sympathy crossed his features, quickly followed by what I could only describe as a dangerous smile. "So tell me something. Would you prefer to stand here looking heartbroken and invisible? Or would you rather come with me?" "Come with you? Where?" I managed to whisper, my brain still struggling to catch up with reality. He gestured toward the cafe's interior with a subtle nod. "Inside. With me." He stepped slightly closer, lowering his voice to something unexpectedly gentle. "Let me show you what it feels like when someone actually values your presence." My heartbeat accelerated. This was insane. I didn't know this man from Adam, but when I glanced back at Steve, at the way he was caressing that blonde guy's hand, the way he was leaning in close like they shared secrets, something inside me cracked. "All right," I heard myself say, my voice sounding far more confident than I felt. Ashton held the door open for me as we entered properly, and I saw Steve's eyes immediately land on us. His smile froze mid-laugh, his expression transforming from joy to shock in an instant. When his gaze shifted to Ashton, every drop of color drained from his face. Ashton moved with practiced ease, selecting a table that was perfectly positioned in Steve's direct line of sight. He pulled out a chair with a graceful, almost theatrical gesture. "Sit with me instead," he said, his voice carrying just enough volume for nearby tables to hear while maintaining an intimate quality. I sat down, my hands trembling slightly as I placed them in my lap. Ashton settled into the chair across from me with the kind of natural confidence that suggested he'd never felt uncomfortable anywhere in his life. Steve's face had gone from pale to completely white. He was no longer paying any attention to his date, his eyes fixed on our table with an expression I couldn't quite read. Shock, anger, and was that jealousy? For the first time since I'd walked into this café, the crushing pain in my chest lessened just a fraction. Because for the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't invisible. I wasn't the one being ignored or taken for granted. Someone was actually seeing me, choosing to sit with me, making me feel like I mattered. Ashton caught my eye and gave me a small, reassuring nod, as if to say, "You're doing fine." And somehow in that moment, surrounded by the clinking of coffee cups and the low murmur of conversation, with my boyfriend's shocked face burning into my peripheral vision, I felt the tiniest spark of something I hadn't felt in months. Ashton picked up the menu, but his attention remained firmly on me rather than the list of expensive brunch options. I felt exposed under his gaze, though not in an uncomfortable way, more like he was genuinely interested in ending who I was. "How long have you been with Steve?" he asked casually, setting the menu aside without having looked at it properly. 8 months. I answered quietly, desperately trying not to glance at Steve, who I could feel watching us from across the cafe. Ashton let out a low whistle. 8 months. That's actually impressive. Most of his relationships don't make it past 3. I looked at him sharply. "What do you mean by that?" His expression grew serious, and he leaned back in his chair with a weary sigh. "Steve is my half-brother. We share the same father but have different mothers. Ever since high school, he's had this pattern. He finds someone genuine, someone good, makes them fall completely in love with him, and then, well, you've seen what happens next." A sharp pain lanced through my chest. So I was just another name on a list, another fool who'd fallen for his act? Ashton must have read the devastation on my face because he leaned forward, his voice softening. "But you don't have to let him continue winning, do you?" "I don't even know what to do right now," I admitted, hating how my voice shook. I feel like I can't breathe." "Here's what you're going to do," Ashton said, his tone becoming both gentle and firm. "You're going to sit right here with me. You're going to breathe. You're going to act as though he no longer has any power over you. Show him that you don't need him." I swallowed hard. "But why would you help me? You don't even know me." Ashton was quiet for several seconds, seeming to carefully consider his response. "Because I've watched Steve hurt too many good people over the years, and I'm tired of it. Also, something tells me you deserve better than being someone's game." My heart did an unexpected flutter. This whole situation was surreal. I was sitting across from a complete stranger while my ex-boyfriend, watched from across the room, and somehow this stranger was making me feel more valued than Steve had in months. A waiter approached our table, and Ashton smoothly placed an order. "He'll have the truffle eggs Benedict with fresh orange juice. I'll take black coffee and the smoked salmon bagel." I stared at him in surprise. "How did you know I'd want that? You look like someone who needs comfort right now, not complicated cuisine." Ashton replied simply. From the corner of my eye, I noticed Steve completely ignoring his date, his attention fixed on our table. His face was flushed, and even from this distance I could see the tension in his shoulders. Ashton noticed too and allowed himself a small, satisfied smile. "He's rattled. That's good. This isn't about revenge," I said, though I wasn't entirely sure what this was about anymore. "Call it whatever makes you comfortable," Ashton responded calmly. "But right now, you have 2 clear choices. You can go over there, make a scene, break down in tears and lose whatever dignity you have left. Or you can stay here, enjoy a nice meal with me, and show him that he didn't break you." I took a deep breath, letting his words sink in. He was right. I wanted to be strong, even though everything inside me felt shattered. Okay, I whispered. That's the spirit, Ashton murmured, and something in his tone felt genuinely supportive. When our food arrived, I was surprised to find myself actually enjoying it. Ashton kept the conversation flowing naturally, telling me about his work as CEO of Wilder Enterprises, sharing amusing anecdotes about business meetings gone wrong, and even relating a few embarrassing stories from Steve's childhood that painted a very different picture of the man I thought I knew. When Steve was 12, he convinced our father's entire staff that he was allergic to vegetables. Ashton said with a chuckle. Kept the act up for 6 months before our stepmother caught him eating a salad at his friend's house. Despite everything, I found myself laughing. That sounds about right. Actually, he once told me he was lactose intolerant for 3 weeks before I caught him eating ice cream straight from the container. Ashton shook his head. That's Steve in a nutshell. He'll construct these elaborate lies for no reason other than to see if he can get away with it. As we were finishing our meal, Steve suddenly appeared at our table, his face flushed with anger. Ashton, what exactly do you think you're doing? Steve demanded, completely ignoring my presence. Ashton stood up slowly, and I was struck by how his height and presence became almost intimidating. I'm having brunch. Is there a problem? Steve gestured at me, but seemed unable to finish his sentence. Your ex, Ashton cut in firmly. That's the word you're looking for, Steve. Your ex. Because clearly you're occupied with someone else. Steve's face turned an even deeper shade of red. His blonde companion was now visibly uncomfortable, looking like he wanted to disappear. Ashton placed a hand on my shoulder, the gesture protective and reassuring. And if you have an issue with that, you can take it up with me. Leave him out of this. Steve clenched his jaw, and for a moment I thought he might actually start a fight. Instead, he turned sharply and stalked back to his table, practically vibrating with frustration. I was breathing shakily, my hands trembling. Ashton looked down at me, his expression concerned. Are you okay? I nodded, though I wasn't entirely sure that was true. Come on, he said softly. Let's get out of here before he tries something else. And just like that, with one last glance at Steve's furious face, Ashton guided me out of the cafe, leaving behind the lies and the pain of what I'd thought was a real relationship. Ashton's car was elegant without being ostentatious, a sleek black sedan that whispered rather than shouted wealth. I settled into the passenger seat, still trying to process everything that had happened in the last hour. My mind felt like it was wrapped in cotton, my emotions a tangled mess I couldn't begin to unravel. Where are we going? I finally asked as he smoothly navigated through the city streets. My place, Ashton answered matter-of-factly. I jerked in my seat. Wait, what? I don't think— Relax, he interrupted, and I could hear the amusement in his voice. I'm not kidnapping you. I just think you need some space to process everything without running into Steve. You two live in the same neighborhood, don't you? He was right. Steve's apartment was only 3 blocks from mine. The thought of going home and potentially bumping into him made my stomach turn. Yeah, we do, I admitted quietly. All right, your place is fine. The drive was mostly silent, but it wasn't uncomfortable. Ashton had put on some kind of instrumental jazz that filled the quiet without demanding attention. Despite the strangeness of the situation, I found his presence oddly calming rather than threatening. When we arrived at his building, I couldn't hide my surprise. The penthouse was in one of those modern high-rises with all glass and steel, the kind of place I'd only ever seen in architecture magazines. Inside, floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking view of the city skyline. Make yourself at home, Ashton said, removing his blazer and rolling up his sleeves. I'm going to make us some coffee. I perched awkwardly on the edge of his couch, taking in my surroundings. Everything was minimalist yet clearly expensive. Carefully chosen art pieces on the walls, furniture that looked like it belonged in a design showroom. Not a lived-in space. My mind kept circling back to Steve, to the way he'd been holding that guy's hand, to 8 months of what I'd thought was real love. Ashton returned with a tray bearing 2 cups of coffee and some cookies arranged on a small plate. He sat across from me, his posture relaxed but his eyes attentive. Talk to me, he said gently. What's going through your head right now? I keep thinking about how stupid I was, I said bitterly. There were signs. I ignored every single one of them because I wanted to believe. My voice cracked, and I had to stop. Stop that right now, Ashton said firmly. You weren't stupid. Steve is exceptionally skilled at manipulation. This is entirely his fault, not yours. I looked up at him, searching his face for any sign of judgment and finding none. But why are you doing this? Helping me? You don't owe me anything. Ashton was quiet for a moment, seeming to weigh his words carefully. Finally he leaned back and clasped his hands together. I know what it's like to be used by someone you trusted. I've watched Steve destroy good people for years, and I'm tired of standing by and doing nothing. You seem like someone who deserves better. There's more to it than that though, isn't there? I pressed. You're perceptive, Ashton said with a slight smile. Yes, there is. I have a proposition for you if you're willing to hear it. I set down my coffee cup, suddenly wary. A proposition? Ashton stood and walked to the windows, his silhouette sharp against the afternoon sunlight streaming through. Steve needs to face real consequences for once in his life. And frankly, I'm tired of watching him damage my family's reputation with his behavior. I still don't understand what that has to do with me, I said cautiously. He turned to face me, his expression serious. I want you to fake date me, just for a few weeks. Public appearances, maybe some social media posts. We show Steve, and everyone else, that you've moved on quickly and with someone he can't compete with. My jaw dropped. You can't be serious. I'm completely serious, Ashton said. Think about it. You get to make Steve jealous, hurt his ego the way he hurt you, and genuinely start moving on from this relationship. Meanwhile, Steve finally learns that his actions have consequences. That's absolutely insane, I said, standing up. This is real life, not some romantic comedy. Is it though? Ashton challenged, moving closer to me. Or are you already thinking about going back to him? Because you know he'll come back with apologies and promises. They always do. And the cycle will start all over again. Something twisted in my gut because he was absolutely right. Steve had broken up with me twice before, only to come crawling back a week later with flowers and tearful apologies. Both times I'd taken him back. I need time to think about this, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Take all the time you need, Ashton said softly. But know that my offer stands, and if you agree, I promise I won't waste your time. I'll actually make this arrangement beneficial for you. He was close now, close enough that I could smell his cologne. Something clean and sophisticated that suited him perfectly. Part of me wanted to run from this crazy proposal, but another part, a part I didn't want to examine too closely, was already considering saying yes. I'll think about it, I finally managed to say. Ashton's smile was warm and genuine, completely different from the commanding presence he'd shown earlier. That's all I ask. He drove me home, and the ride was filled with a comfortable silence that felt oddly intimate. When we pulled up outside my apartment building, I hesitated before opening the door. Thank you, I said, for today, for standing up for me back there. Anytime, Ashton replied, and something in his tone made me think he meant it. I went inside and spent the rest of the afternoon pacing my apartment, Ashton's proposal echoing in my head. Fake dating? It was ridiculous. Completely absurd. Then my phone buzzed. Steve's message lit up the screen. Baby, please, can we talk? I can explain everything. It wasn't what it looked like. I stared at those words, the same words he'd used the last 2 times, the same manipulation, the same game, and suddenly Ashton's proposal didn't seem quite so crazy after all. I didn't sleep at all that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Steve's face in that café, heard Ashton's proposition echoing in my mind, and felt the weight of the decision pressing down on my chest. By the time dawn broke through my curtains, painting my bedroom in shades of pale gold, I'd made my choice. My fingers trembled slightly as I typed out the text. I'm in. Let's do this. Ashton's response came within seconds. Perfect. Meet me at my office at 2 p.m. sharp. We'll discuss the details. The Wilder Enterprises building was even more imposing in daylight than I'd imagined. All glass and polished steel, it rose into the sky like a monument to corporate success. The lobby was a study in minimalist elegance. White marble floors, abstract art on the walls, and a reception desk that looked like it cost more than my car. A receptionist with a professional smile directed me to the executive floor. My heart hammered as the elevator climbed higher, each ding marking another floor closer to what felt like a point of no return. Ashton's office matched the man himself. Sophisticated, powerful, perfectly controlled. He sat behind a massive mahogany desk, reading through what looked like financial reports, his brow furrowed in concentration. When I knocked softly on the open door, he looked up and his expression immediately softened. "Right on time," he said, gesturing to the chair across from him. "Punctuality is a trait I value highly." I sat down, trying to ignore the nervous energy coursing through my veins. "So, what exactly are the terms here?" Ashton set aside his papers and leaned back in his chair. His posture relaxed but his eyes sharp and focused. "First and foremost, this begins as a business arrangement. We both go into this understanding that initially, there are no expectations of genuine romantic feelings. This is mutually beneficial. Nothing more, nothing less." I nodded, though something uncomfortable twisted in my stomach at the clinical way he laid it out. "Second," he continued, steepling his fingers, "we'll need to make regular public appearances. Dinners at places where we're likely to be seen, events within my social circle, possibly a weekend getaway that we'll document on social media. Everything needs to look authentic and natural." "And what about—" I hesitated, feeling heat creep up my neck. "Physical contact?" Something flickered in Ashton's dark eyes. "Hand-holding when we're out in public?" "Yes. Casual touches, my hand on your back. That sort of thing. Kissing, if the situation absolutely demands it for believability. But, and this is crucial, Luca, only ever with your explicit consent. I will always ask first. Always." My heart rate kicked up several notches just thinking about it. "That seems fair, I suppose." "Third, and this is the most important rule," Ashton said, leaning forward with sudden intensity. "The moment you feel uncomfortable, the second you want to stop, you say the word. Immediately, no questions asked, no hard feelings. This arrangement ends the instant you want it to. You're not trapped here." I stared at him, genuinely surprised by the consideration in his voice. "You're being remarkably thoughtful about this." "I'm a businessman, Luca, not a monster," Ashton replied quietly. "Yes, I want to teach Steve a lesson he won't forget, but not at the expense of hurting someone who doesn't deserve it. And you seem like someone worth protecting, not using." Something warm unfurled in my chest, pushing back against the anxiety that had been building there. Maybe this arrangement wasn't as cold and calculated as I'd feared. "So," Ashton stood and extended his hand across the desk. "Do we have an agreement?" I took his hand, feeling the warmth and firmness of his grip. "We have an agreement. Excellent." His smile was genuine, reaching his eyes in a way that made him look younger, less like the intimidating CEO and more like just a person. "Our first official appearance is tonight. There's a restaurant called Lumiere, French cuisine, very upscale. Steve goes there almost every Friday evening." Of course he'd planned this so perfectly. "What time?" "I'll pick you up at 7. Wear something nice but comfortable." He reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a sleek business card. "This is my personal number. If anything comes up or if you change your mind, call me directly." I pocketed the card, feeling its weight like a promise. "I won't change my mind." The afternoon passed in a blur of anxiety and preparation. I must have changed outfits 5 times before settling on a dark blue button-down shirt and well-fitted black slacks. At exactly 7 o'clock, my phone buzzed with a text. "I'm outside." Ashton stepped out as I approached, moving around to open the passenger door for me. He looked devastating in a charcoal suit with a black shirt underneath. No tie, the top button undone in a way that somehow made the whole ensemble look effortlessly elegant. "You look great," he said, and the compliment sounded sincere. "Thanks, you clean up pretty well yourself." I managed, sliding into the car. The drive to Lumiere took about 20 minutes. Ashton filled the silence with easy conversation about his day, a difficult client he'd dealt with. He talked to me like I was a friend, not a business arrangement, and I found myself relaxing. The restaurant was everything I'd expected. Soft lighting, white tablecloths and crystal stemware, the quiet murmur of expensive conversations. A pianist played something classical in the corner. Ashton spoke briefly with the host, who led us to a table positioned perfectly in the center of the dining room. Maximum visibility. We'd barely been seated for 10 minutes when I spotted them. Steve and his blonde companion. Steve saw us immediately. I watched the color drain from his face. Watched his steps falter before he forced himself to keep walking. "He's here," I whispered, my mouth suddenly dry. "I know," Ashton replied calmly, reaching across the table to place his hand over mine. "Remember, we're just two people enjoying dinner together." His touch was warm and steady, grounding me. "Tell me something about yourself," Ashton said, his voice genuinely curious. Something real, something Steve never took the time to ask about. I took a breath, deciding to trust him. "I've always wanted to be a writer, fiction. Stories that make people feel something." "Why haven't you pursued it?" Ashton asked. "Steve said it was impractical, that I should focus on something more stable. So I work in marketing instead." Ashton's expression hardened slightly. "Steve is an idiot. Writing is one of the most important things a person can do. If you have stories to tell, you should tell them." Something in my chest loosened. A knot I hadn't realized was there. Our food arrived and the meal was exquisite, though I could hardly taste it, too aware of Steve's eyes from across the room. As we finished, Ashton leaned closer, his voice dropping. "Steve is watching us very closely right now. Would you be comfortable if I touched your face, just briefly?" I hesitated only a moment before nodding. Ashton's hand came up slowly. His thumb brushed along my cheekbone, the touch feather-light and surprisingly gentle. His eyes never left mine, and for a moment the restaurant seemed to fade away. "Thank you for trusting me," he said softly. We left shortly after, Ashton's hand settling naturally at the small of my back as we walked out. In my peripheral vision, I saw Steve half rise from his seat. The drive back was quiet but not awkward. Something had shifted between us over dinner. "Tonight went well," Ashton said as he pulled up outside my building. "You're a natural at this. Same time tomorrow? There's an art exhibition opening that several of my business associates will be attending. I'll be ready." As I headed inside, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just stepped onto a path I couldn't see the end of. And the strangest part was, I wasn't sure I wanted to turn back. The next week dissolved into a montage of carefully orchestrated moments that somehow felt increasingly less orchestrated. Tuesday was the art gallery opening, where Ashton stood close as he explained the symbolism in abstract paintings. Wednesday brought a lunch meeting with his colleagues, where he introduced me with a pride in his voice that I told myself was just good acting. Thursday we grabbed coffee downtown and he insisted on buying a copy of my favorite author's latest book when he saw me eyeing it. Each appearance was documented naturally. Photos that showed up on Ashton's rarely used Instagram. Casual mentions in conversations. The narrative was simple. Ashton Wilder had found someone who made him happy. The problem was, I was starting to wonder how much of it was still pretend. Steve's presence lurked in the background of everything we did. He sent text messages that I deleted without reading. He called from unknown numbers that I blocked. Once I saw his car parked outside my apartment building, but when I mentioned it to Ashton, he'd made a single phone call and the car was gone within the hour. Friday night arrived with an invitation to a charity gala, the kind of event where tickets cost more than my monthly rent. Ashton had a tuxedo delivered to my apartment that afternoon, perfectly tailored to measurements I'd never given him. "How did you know my size?" I asked when he picked me up. "I have a good eye for details," he replied with a slight smile. "Does it fit?" It fit perfectly, and I hated how good that made me feel. The gala was held in a historic hotel ballroom, all crystal chandeliers and gold leaf accents. Photographers lined the entrance, their cameras flashing like lightning. My stomach twisted nervously as we approached. "Just breathe," Ashton murmured, his hand finding its place at the small of my back. "You look incredible. Own it." The cameras loved him. Ashton had that rare quality of looking natural in front of a lens, his smile easy and confident. I tried to match his energy. Inside, the ballroom was packed with elegantly dressed people holding champagne flutes. Ashton navigated through them with practiced ease, introducing me to business partners and old friends. "This is Luca," he'd say, and then, with what seemed like genuine warmth, "My boyfriend." Every time he said it, something in my chest tightened. Hearing it out loud made everything feel more concrete, more dangerous. I spotted Steve about an hour into the event. He was standing near the bar with a woman I didn't recognize. When our eyes met across the room, the hatred in his expression was palpable. "He's here," I said quietly. Ashton followed my gaze and something shifted in his posture. "I see him. Are you okay?" "I'm fine. Would you like to leave?" The offer surprised me. I thought the whole point was to be seen together. "The point is whatever you need it to be," Ashton corrected gently. "If you're uncomfortable, we can go. Steve isn't worth your peace of mind." Before I could respond, the music changed. A slower tempo, something romantic. Couples began drifting toward the center of the ballroom. "Dance with me," Ashton said. "I'm not a very good dancer," I admitted. "Neither am I really. We'll figure it out together." He extended his hand, waiting. I slipped my hand into his and let him lead me onto the floor. His right hand settled on my waist, his left holding mine, and suddenly we were moving, swaying to the music in a way that felt more intimate than any of our previous staged moments. "You're doing fine," he said quietly. "You're just saying that because you're a good lead." "I'm saying it because it's true." His dark eyes met mine, and there was something in them I couldn't quite read. "You know, when I first proposed this arrangement, I thought it would be simple, straightforward, help you get back at Steve, teach him a lesson. And now?" I asked, my heart beginning to race. "Now I'm not sure what this is anymore," he admitted. We kept dancing, but the air between us had changed, charged with an electricity that had nothing to do with our agreements. I was acutely aware of everywhere our bodies touched. His hand warm on my waist, our palms pressed together. The song was ending, couples beginning to separate, but Ashton didn't let go. Instead, he leaned closer, his forehead nearly touching mine. "Luca," he said, and my name sounded different in his voice, vulnerable, uncertain. "Can I kiss you?" My breath caught. "Everyone's watching." "I know. Steve is watching, but that's not why I'm asking." His eyes searched mine. "I'm asking because I want to. Because pretending with you has started to feel less like pretending. But only if you want this too." I should have said no. This was supposed to be fake, a business transaction. But looking into Ashton's eyes, feeling the warmth of his body so close to mine, I couldn't remember why any of that had seemed important. "Yes," I whispered. He kissed me slowly, carefully, like I was something precious. It wasn't performative or showy. It was tender and honest and absolutely terrifying in its sincerity. When he pulled back, I felt dizzy. "Perfect," he murmured, but there was something pained in his expression, something that looked almost like regret. We left shortly after. The car ride back was silent, tension humming between us like a live wire. Every time I glanced at Ashton, I found him already looking at me, his expression conflicted. When he pulled up outside my apartment, I knew we couldn't leave things unsaid. "That kiss," I started. "I know what you're going to say," Ashton interrupted, his voice strained. "It was part of the act, for appearance, but it didn't feel like an act," I said quietly. Ashton's hands tightened on the steering wheel. He was quiet for a long moment before turning to face me fully. "Because it wasn't. Not for me. Not anymore." My heart hammered against my ribs. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that somewhere along the way this stopped being about Steve. It stopped being about revenge, or teaching lessons." He ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident. "I'm saying that I've developed real feelings for you, Luca, and I have no idea what to do about it." "I feel it too," I admitted, the words tumbling out. "I've been trying to convince myself it's just the situation, just the proximity, but it's not." Ashton finished. "No, it's not." The silence that followed was heavy, weighted with everything we weren't saying. "This is complicated," Ashton finally said. "Extremely complicated. Steve is still my brother, and you're his ex-boyfriend. There are family dynamics here that I know, and we agreed this was just an arrangement. No real feelings involved." "Exactly." But Ashton didn't sound convinced. "So we should probably end this now, before it gets more complicated." "We should," I agreed. Neither of us moved. "Unless," Ashton said slowly, "unless we decide that complicated is worth it. That whatever this is between us is worth exploring." "Are you asking me if I want to make this real?" "I'm asking if you're willing to cross a line that we can't uncross." Because once we acknowledge that these feelings are genuine, there's no going back. It becomes something else entirely. I looked at him, really looked at him, at the man who'd defended me from Steve, who'd encouraged my dreams, who'd made me feel valued. I want this to be real, I said. No more pretending. Just us figuring out what this is. Ashton's expression shifted. Relief and fear and hope all mixed together. He leaned across the console and kissed me again. And this time there was nothing careful about it. This was honest and deep. When we finally broke apart, breathless, Ashton rested his forehead against mine. This changes everything, he said. I know. Morning came too soon, bringing harsh sunlight and harsher reality with it. I lay in bed, replaying the previous night, the kiss, the confession, the decision to make this real. In daylight, it seemed both inevitable and impossible. My phone buzzed insistently. 3 missed calls from an unknown number, 2 voicemails, and a string of text messages from Steve that grew increasingly desperate. I was deleting them when someone started pounding on my apartment door. The knocking was aggressive, angry, and I knew who it was. I opened the door to find Steve looking like he hadn't slept. His eyes were bloodshot, his hair uncombed. We need to talk. Right now, he said, pushing past me before I could protest. You can't just barge in here, Steve. Can't I? He spun to face me. You've been parading around town with my brother. My brother, Luca. Do you have any idea how humiliating that is? Humiliating for you? I couldn't help the bitter laugh. You were cheating on me. But somehow I'm the one humiliating you? That was a misunderstanding. I can explain if you just listen. I don't want your explanations. I cut him off. I want you to leave. Not until we talk about Ashton. Steve's voice dropped. Luca, you have to understand. He's using you. This is exactly what he does. He finds my weak spots and exploits them. He's making you think he cares. But it's all strategy. Something cold settled in my stomach. That's not true, isn't it? You've known him for what, 2 weeks? And suddenly he's playing the perfect boyfriend? He's never been in a serious relationship. He doesn't do emotions, Luca. He does calculated business moves. Stop it. You're just a convenient tool in his game. Get out, I said, but my voice wavered. Steve must have heard the doubt because he pressed harder. I made mistakes. I know that, but at least what we had was real. What you have with Ashton, it's smoke and mirrors. I said get out. The words came out sharper. I love you, Luca. We can work through this. We can fix what's broken. No, we can't. What we had is over. Now leave before I call the police. Steve stared at me for a long moment, then left. But his words lingered like poison. Was he right? Was Ashton using me? The whole thing had started as a calculated plan. What if nothing had really changed? When Ashton texted asking if I wanted to grab lunch, I didn't respond. When he called, I let it go to voicemail. By evening, he showed up at my door. Luca, what's going on? You've been ignoring me all day. His expression was concerned. Steve was here this morning, I said flatly. Understanding dawned in Ashton's eyes, followed by anger. What did he say? That you're using me. That this is all part of some game to get back at him. That you don't do real relationships. I crossed my arms. Is any of it true? Ashton went very still. The silence stretched. Answer me, I demanded. When this started, yes, it was strategic. Ashton said carefully. I saw an opportunity to teach Steve a lesson. And yes, involving you was part of that plan. The words hit like a physical blow. So Steve was right. No, listen. Ashton stepped forward, but I backed away. I was just a tool. At first, maybe yes, Ashton said, pain in his voice. But that's not what this is anymore. Last night, what I said, what I felt, that was real, Luca. How can I trust that? You built this on lies from the beginning. Because I'm standing here being completely honest even though I know it might destroy what we have. Ashton's voice was raw. Yes, this started as a plan. But somewhere along the way, you stopped being a strategy and started being someone I genuinely care about. Your laugh, your dreams, the way you see the world. I value all of it. I wanted to believe him. Steve said you've never been in a serious relationship. Steve is right about that, Ashton admitted. I've spent my life focused on business, on building my career. I've never let anyone get close because close meant vulnerable. But you made me want to take that risk. How do I know they're not just words? You don't, Ashton said simply. I can't prove my feelings with words. I can only show you through actions, through time. But I'm willing to do that if you'll give me the mance. I was quiet, warring with myself. If this is going to be real, then I need you to do something. Anything. Deal with Steve. Publicly. Make it clear that what we have isn't about revenge anymore. And then give me space. Give me time to figure out if I can trust you. Ashton nodded without hesitation. Done. I'll handle Steve tomorrow and I'll give you as much time as you need. True to his word, Ashton confronted Steve the next day at their father's office. He laid out in clear terms exactly what Steve had done wrong and why it was unacceptable. He made it explicitly clear that his relationship with me had evolved beyond strategy. The story spread through their social circle like wildfire. A week passed. Then two. Ashton kept his distance, but small gestures appeared. A book I'd mentioned showed up at my door. My favorite coffee order appeared at work, delivered by someone who said a tall guy in a suit had paid for it. Finally I texted him, "Coffee tomorrow?" He responded within minutes, "Name the time and place." We met at a small café. Ashton looked nervous when he arrived. "You look tired," I said. "Haven't been sleeping well," he admitted. "Kept thinking about everything I should have done differently." Like what? Like being honest from the start. Like finding any other way to deal with Steve. I took a sip of my coffee. Steve texted me yesterday, apologizing, begging me to give him another chance. Ashton's jaw tightened. And I told him no, because even if things don't work out with you, I'm done letting him treat me like an option. I met Ashton's eyes. "You hurt me." The lying hurt. "But at least you owned up to it. At least you were willing to be honest." "I'm sorry, Luca." "I know you are." I reached across the table and took his hand. "And I'm willing to try. Really try. No more games. Just honest communication and seeing where this goes." The smile that broke across Ashton's face was radiant. "I promise you won't regret this." "I'd better not," I warned, smiling too. He leaned across the table and kissed me softly, full of promise. When we pulled apart, Ashton kept hold of my hand. "So where do we go from here?" he asked. "Forward," I said simply. "Together, and we figure out the rest as we go."